The summer of 1987 had been slow in the town of Maple Hollow, a place where people still left their doors unlocked, where evenings smelled of pine trees and barbecue smoke, and where the loudest sound after sunset was the whistle of the freight train passing by the old sawmill. But everything changed on June 12th, the night 8-year-old Emma Clark vanished from her room. The story begins with the sound of rain. Heavy, sudden, uninvited. It hammered on the tin roof of the Clark family's small white house at the edge of Willow Street. Inside, the power had flickered twice before settling into a dull hum. Emma's mother, Janet Clark, had just tucked her in. She read from Charlotte's Web until Emma's eyes grew heavy. On the nightstand, next to a small lamp shaped like a sunflower, sat a red plastic toy phone, the kind children used to pretend to call their friends. Emma called it Cherry. She spoke into it every night before bed, whispering secrets to it like it was real. Janet remembered smiling that night, pulling the blanket up to Emma's chin. "Good night, sweetheart. Good night, Mommy." And then Janet turned off the light and closed the door halfway, just as she always did. By morning, Emma's bed was empty. At 7:15 a.m., Janet entered the room to wake her daughter for breakfast. The blanket was neatly folded back, the pillow still warm. One of Emma's slippers lay by the window, the other beneath the bed. The window itself was open just wide enough for a small person to slip through. At first, Janet thought Emma had gone to the backyard to play. She called her name once, twice, 3 times, her voice echoing into the still air of Maple Hollow. No answer. Within an hour, the police arrived. By noon, every road leading out of town had been blocked. The case of the missing Clark girl spread across the local radio like wildfire. Detective Ray Harlan, a quiet man with dark eyes and a past full of unsolved regrets, was assigned to lead the investigation. He had been with the county department for 15 years, but something about this case felt personal. The innocence of a child, the way the rain had erased every trace of her tiny footprints. When he entered Emma's room for the first time, he noticed 2 things: the open window and the red toy phone sitting perfectly on the floor. The phone had been placed carefully, almost deliberately, facing the door, as if waiting for someone to pick it up. By the end of the first week, there were no signs of forced entry, no ransom notes, no witnesses. Neighbors said they saw nothing unusual, only the flicker of the Clark's porch light around midnight and the sound of rain. Emma's father, Tom Clark, a truck driver who was out on a delivery route that night, came home and collapsed on the kitchen floor when he heard. He couldn't stop repeating her name, "Emma, my baby, Emma," until his voice gave out. The search stretched into months. Volunteers combed the nearby woods. Flyers with Emma's picture, blonde hair and pigtails, missing front tooth, were plastered across gas stations, diners, and school notice boards. By autumn, the case went cold. The Clark family moved away in 1989, leaving behind an empty house with faded yellow curtains and a broken swing set that creaked whenever the wind passed through. 18 years later, Maple Hollow had changed. The sawmill had shut down. The diner on Main Street now sold espresso instead of pie. Most of the old families had moved away, but Detective Ray Harlan was still there. He had retired 5 years earlier, yet Emma Clark's case still haunted him. Some nights he'd find himself driving to Willow Street, parking in front of the old Clark house. It was now abandoned, its white paint peeling, ivy crawling up the porch rails. And every time he looked at that window, Emma's window, he felt the same quiet guilt that had followed him for nearly 2 decades. He had promised Janet Clark he would find her daughter. He never did. It was April 2005 when the phone call came. Ray was sitting at his kitchen table, sorting through old files, the kind of thing retired detectives do when they can't let go. Outside, a storm was rolling in. The phone rang, not his cell, but the old landline on the wall. "Detective Harlan?" a voice said. "This is Deputy Mills from Maple Hollow PD. You might want to come down to the old Clark residence. There's something you should see." Ray felt a familiar tightness in his chest. What happened? Mills hesitated. The house was sold recently. New owners started renovations this week. They found something strange in the little girl's room. Ray's hands trembled as he reached for his coat. When he arrived, the house was wrapped in scaffolding and caution tape. The air smelled of wet wood and dust. Inside, everything had been stripped, wallpaper peeled, floorboards half removed. Deputy Mills met him at the door. "Basements flooded from the rain," he said. "Electricians are working in the back." "What did they find?" Ray asked. Mills nodded toward the stairs. "Upstairs. Second room on the left." The door creaked as Ray pushed it open. The room was smaller than he remembered. Bare walls, cracked ceiling, faint traces of pink paint. And there, in the center of the floor, sat a red plastic toy phone. The same kind, the same model. Ray froze. "It was behind the wall," Mills explained. "The construction crew found it when they tore down the old drywall. Wires were run through the wall for some reason, connecting to a junction box that doesn't lead anywhere." Ray crouched down slowly. The toy phone was covered in dust. Its plastic faded. The rotary dial cracked. But when he picked it up, something shifted inside. A small rattle like something loose. He unscrewed the bottom. Inside, beneath the compartment that should have held batteries, was a folded photograph. He unfolded it carefully. It was a picture of Emma, taken sometime before she disappeared. She was smiling, standing in front of the same window, holding the same toy phone. But behind her, faintly visible in the reflection of the glass, was the shape of a man standing outside, blurry, indistinct, watching. Ray's heart pounded. He looked around the room again, this time noticing faint markings on the wooden floor, the outline of something square that had once been there, maybe a box or a small rug. He ran his hand across the surface and felt a ridge, the edge of a loose floorboard. He pried it open. Beneath it lay a rusted tin lunchbox. Inside were children's drawings, crumpled letters, and a single Polaroid photo dated 1989, 2 years after Emma disappeared. The photo showed a young girl sitting on a bench beside a man whose face was partly cropped out. The girl looked older, maybe 10 or 11. Her smile was faint, uncertain. Ray's pulse quickened. He turned the photo over. On the back, written in a child's handwriting, were 4 words. "Call me on Cherry." Cherry, the toy phone. Ray's eyes widened. "Deputy," he said quietly, "get me a camera, and don't touch anything." It took him 3 days to run the photo through every missing persons database he still had access to. Nothing. No matches, no leads. But one detail stood out. The handwriting matched a note Emma's mother had given him years ago. A note Emma had written before she vanished. Same looping E. Same crooked Y. It was her. But the photo was dated 2 years after her disappearance. How was that possible? Ray drove to the Clark family's new address, 2 states away. Janet Clark opened the door slowly, her face lined with age and grief. "Mrs. Clark," he said softly, "I found something." She hesitated, eyes filling with tears before he even showed her the photo. "It's been 18 years, she whispered. "Why now?" Ray handed her the Polaroid. Her hand trembled. "That's her," Janet said. "That's Emma. I'd know that smile anywhere." Her voice broke. "But who's the man?" Ray didn't answer. He was staring at the corner of the photo, where the shadow of the man's jacket bore a small, stitched emblem, a blue star inside a white circle. He recognized it immediately. It was the insignia of the Maple Hollow Sheriff's Department. That night, back at his home, the storm returned, just like in '87. Thunder rolled over the valley. Lightning flashed against the windows. Ray placed the toy phone on his desk beside the photo. He sat there for hours, staring at it. And then, just as the clock struck midnight, the toy phone rang. A shrill, mechanical sound that cut through the silence like a scream. Ray jumped to his feet, heart racing. It rang again. Once. Twice. 3 times. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling, and lifted the receiver to his ear. Static. Then faintly a child's voice. "Mr. Harlan?" The line went dead. The sound of that toy phone still echoed in Ray Harlan's ears long after the line went dead. He stood there in his dim kitchen, frozen, hand still gripping the red plastic receiver. The rain outside had stopped, Everything was silent again, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock, marking the seconds since that impossible voice had said his name. Mr. Harlan? The voice was small, trembling, childlike, and unmistakably familiar. Ray placed the receiver back in its cradle and just stared at it. He could feel his pulse throbbing at the base of his neck. For a moment, he wondered if it had been a hallucination, an echo from a mind that had lived too long with regret. But then the rational part of him, the detective part, took over. He unplugged the toy phone, photographed it, and labeled the evidence bag with shaky handwriting. Recovered call, 12:01 a.m. Then he sat down at his desk and did what he'd done his entire life when something didn't make sense. He started to investigate. The first step was to trace the sound. The toy phone had no electronics inside, no batteries, no mechanism that could produce a ring. When he turned it over, he saw that one of the old screws had been replaced. New, polished metal, not rusted like the others. Someone had tampered with it recently. He carefully pried it open. Inside, wedged behind the plastic casing, was a small Bluetooth receiver, modern, compact, the kind used for kids' walkie-talkie toys. Someone planted this? Ray muttered under his breath. It meant the call had come from somewhere nearby, maybe even within range of his property. He went outside, flashlight in hand, scanning the tree line that bordered his backyard. It was quiet except for the low hum of insects. His mind raced. Who would have known about the toy phone? Who had access to it after the renovation site was sealed off? And then he thought of Deputy Mills. Ray drove to the Maple Hollow Police Department just after dawn. The building hadn't changed much since he retired. Faded brick, crooked flagpole, the smell of burnt coffee wafting from inside. Mills was already there, uniform pressed, sipping from a styrofoam cup. "Morning, detective," he said, startled. "Didn't expect to see you this early." Ray didn't answer right away. He just stared at him. "Who else knew about the toy phone?" he asked finally. Just the renovation guys and me," Mills said. "Why?" "Because it rang last night." Mills blinked. "Rang? The toy?" "Yes. Someone modified it with a Bluetooth transmitter. I traced the make and frequency. It only works within 200 feet. Whoever called was close, real close." Mills frowned. "You think someone's playing games?" Ray stepped closer. "No. I think someone's trying to tell us something." They drove back to the Clark house together. The construction crew hadn't arrived yet. The morning fog hung low over the street. Ray scanned the perimeter. The ground was muddy from last night's rain, but there were fresh tire tracks, small, narrow, from a compact car. He followed them to the back of the property where a chain-link fence separated the yard from the old train tracks. There, half buried in wet grass, was an empty coffee cup with the Maple Hollow PD logo. Ray's stomach turned. "Mills," he said quietly. "You were here last night?" Mills's face paled. "Yeah, I drove by. I couldn't sleep, so I came to check the site again. In case of trespassers." Ray stared at him for a long time. "And you didn't notice the toy phone missing?" Mills swallowed. "It wasn't missing when I left." Ray didn't say another word. He just photographed the cup, marked the tracks, and made a mental note. Deputy Mills, possible involvement or cover-up. Back at his home office, Ray spread out the evidence, the toy phone, the Polaroid, the letters. He re-examined the handwriting on the back of the photograph. "Call me on Cherry." There was a smudge of ink beneath the word me, as though someone had written over another line. Under strong light, he could just make out the faded impression of numbers, 4-0-5-1-8. He opened his laptop and cross-checked local numbers from the 1980s. The prefix matched the Maple Hollow Sheriff's Department's old dispatch line. But 40518 wasn't a valid extension. Then it hit him, maybe it wasn't a phone number at all. He scribbled the digits on a pad and rearranged them. 4-0-5-1-8. Mills's police badge number was 40518. Ray sat back in his chair, every muscle in his body tightening. "God help me," he whispered. Later that day, Ray paid a quiet visit to Janet Clark again. She had been sitting on her porch, holding a faded photo album. "Mrs. Clark," he said gently, Did your daughter ever mention anyone from the police department? Maybe someone who visited the house before she disappeared. Janet's brow furrowed. Not that I remember. But after Emma went missing, there was an officer who kept stopping by. Young, kind of nervous. Said he was helping with the case even after the others gave up. What was his name? Officer Mills. I think his name was Daniel Mills. Ray felt a chill crawl up his spine. Are you sure? She nodded slowly. Why? Is something wrong? He didn't answer. He just closed the album gently and stood up. Back in town, Ray went through the old personnel files, the ones still stored in the dusty basement of the precinct. Deputy Daniel Mills had joined the force in 1985. He would have been 24 when Emma disappeared. His early records were spotless, but after 1988, there were gaps, missing evaluations, and signed reports. Then, in 1989, a transfer request to another department that was denied. Attached to that request was a single-page letter in Mills's handwriting. There are things I can't carry anymore. I want to leave this place before it eats me alive. Ray exhaled slowly. He photocopied the file and slipped it into his coat. That evening, he set up a small recording device next to the toy phone. If whoever called tried again, he'd have proof. Midnight came and went. Nothing. At 1:13 a.m., the phone rang once. Just once. Then silence. The recorder captured a faint digital tone. Not a real call, but a signal. Someone was testing the connection. Ray triangulated the Bluetooth ping with a tracking app and pinpointed the source. Somewhere near the old train depot, a mile from the Clark house. He grabbed his flashlight and gun and drove. The depot had been abandoned for years. Boarded windows, graffiti on the walls, weeds crawling through the cracks of the platform. Ray stepped inside carefully. His flashlight beam cut through the dust. In one corner, he saw a faint glow, the blue light of a Bluetooth transmitter. It was wired to a portable battery pack and a second toy phone, identical to the first. On the floor beside it was a manila envelope marked, "For you." Ray opened it. Inside were old photographs. More Polaroids of Emma, each taken months apart in different locations. A playground, a park bench, a roadside diner. The last photo showed her standing outside a small cabin, wearing a flannel jacket that looked too big for her. The date on the back read June 1995. That was 8 years after she disappeared. At the bottom of the envelope was a note. I didn't mean to hurt her, but someone had to keep her safe. It was signed simply, DM. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Ray spun around, flashlight up. Mills stood there in the doorway, hands raised. Detective, please. Let me explain. Ray kept the light trained on him. You've got 30 seconds. Mills's voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I was just supposed to watch her. Keep her away from her father. Ray's eyes narrowed. Her father. Mills nodded, trembling. You don't know what Tom Clark was like. He was being investigated for abuse, but the department buried it. Janet begged for help, but they wanted to protect one of their own. Tom was friends with the sheriff. So I took her. I thought I was saving her. Ray felt the weight of the words sink into him like stones. Where is she, Mills? I don't know, Mills whispered. After a few years, I found her a home with a family up north. She was happy. I used to call her on the toy phone to check in, but when she got older, she stopped answering. I didn't want to scare her. I thought it was over. His eyes filled with tears. Until someone took the second phone from my house last week. That's why it rang, Ray. Someone else has it now. Who? Ray demanded. Mills shook his head. I don't know, but they left me a note. He reached into his jacket and handed Ray a folded scrap of paper. Ray opened it carefully. Inside, scrawled in childish handwriting, were 3 words. I remember everything. Ray's voice dropped to a whisper. She's alive. Mills nodded weakly. And she's coming back. The next morning, the sun broke over Maple Hollow like a reluctant confession. Detective Ray Harlan hadn't slept. The words from that note, I remember everything, looped endlessly in his mind. 18 years. 18 years since Emma Clark had vanished from her pink-walled room and left a town haunted by silence. And now she was alive. But if Emma remembered everything, what exactly did she remember? Ray sat in his car outside the precinct, the toy phone resting on the passenger seat beside him. Mills had been taken in quietly for questioning. No cuffs, no noise, no headlines. For now, Ray wanted to keep this quiet. The truth had been buried once before. He wouldn't let it happen again. He called Janet Clark before sunrise. "Mrs. Clark," he said gently, "I need you to prepare yourself. We have reason to believe Emma might still be alive." There was a long, trembling silence on the other end. "Detective," Janet whispered, "don't do this to me. Please don't give me hope again." Ray's throat tightened. "This isn't a false lead. I've seen recent photos. I believe she was kept safe. At least for a while." He heard her muffled sob, followed by the words, "Tell me what I need to do." By afternoon, Ray had traced the origin of the Bluetooth signal from the toy phone to a cell phone tower just outside Ashgrove, a small town 2 hours north. Using that, he narrowed it down to one likely number, a prepaid phone purchased under a false name. The last transaction from that number was a bus ticket. Destination, Maple Hollow. Arrival, 6:45 p.m. tonight. Emma Clark was coming home. The bus hissed to a stop under the flickering streetlights of the Maple Hollow terminal. A handful of passengers stepped off, most dragging worn suitcases, faces dull from travel. And then she appeared. A woman in her late 20s, auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing a faded denim jacket. Her eyes, deep green, guarded, scanned the small crowd like someone returning to a place she had only visited in dreams. She carried a single bag, and in her right hand, a red plastic toy phone. Ray stepped forward slowly. "Emma?" She turned toward him, tense at first, then searching his face. "You're Ray Harlan," she said softly, the name tasting unfamiliar on her tongue. "You were the detective." "Yes," he said, "and I've been waiting a long time to find you." For a moment, she just looked at him, the weight of years settling into her expression. Then she said quietly, "You shouldn't have." They sat across from each other in the quiet diner across the street from the bus station. The place was nearly empty, save for a waitress refilling coffee and the low hum of an old jukebox. Ray placed the toy phone between them. "I found this last week," he said. It rang. Emma stared at it. No shock, no denial, just a slow exhale, like she'd expected it all along. "I know," she said. "I called it." Ray's chest tightened. "Why now?" She looked up, her voice steady but distant. "Because Daniel Mills is dying." Ray leaned forward. "You know about Mills?" She nodded. "He found me the night I ran. He didn't kidnap me, detective. He saved me." The words hung between them like fog. "I remember my father," she continued, eyes glistening. "The arguments, the shouting, the way my mom would flinch when he came home. One night, I heard her crying. He was angry, drunk. I ran outside, down the street to the corner store. Officer Mills found me there. He promised to keep me safe. He took me to a cabin, said it was temporary." She took a slow breath. "But he couldn't take me back. The sheriff knew what my father was doing and didn't want a scandal. So they made Mills the villain, told the public I'd been kidnapped. And when I got older, they told me never to contact anyone, for my own safety." Ray swallowed hard. "You've lived with that lie your whole life?" She nodded. "Until I found a letter last month. It was from Mills. He said he was sorry, that he was dying, and that he wished he'd told the truth. He told me to come home, to finally let my mother know I was alive." Her voice broke. "But I don't know if she'll want to see me now." Ray's eyes softened. "She's been waiting every day for 18 years. That evening, under the pale glow of the street lamps, Ray drove Emma to the old Clark house. Janet was waiting on the porch, clutching her cardigan like it was the only thing holding her together. When Emma stepped out of the car, Janet froze. Then, slowly, her trembling hand rose to her mouth. "Emma?" Her daughter took one hesitant step forward, then another, until Janet was running, arms outstretched, the years between them dissolving in a single heartbeat. When they finally embraced, the air seemed to break open. The silence that had haunted Maple Hollow replaced by the sound of two souls finding each other again. Ray turned away, giving them their moment. His chest ached. Not from sadness, but from something close to peace. Later that night, after Emma and Janet were inside, Ray drove back to the precinct. Mills was sitting in the interview room, looking smaller than Ray had ever seen him. "Emma's home," Ray said quietly. Mills nodded, tears filling his eyes. "I didn't do everything right, Ray, but I never laid a hand on that girl. I just wanted to protect her." Ray looked at him for a long moment, then said, "The case will show that. I'll make sure of it." He paused at the door. "Why the toy phones, Mills? Why not just call her?" Mills smiled weakly. "She was 7. That toy phone was the only thing she wasn't afraid to answer." The following week, the Maple Hollow Chronicle ran a small headline on the back page. "Missing girl returns after 18 years. Case reopened." The article said nothing of cover-ups, nothing of corruption, nothing of pain. Just a quiet line at the end. "The Clark family asks for privacy as they rebuild their lives." Ray clipped the article and slipped it into his file drawer, the same drawer that had once held hundreds of cold cases. For the first time in decades, one of them was finally warm. Weeks later, Ray stopped by the Clark house one last time. Emma answered the door, smiling shyly. "Mom's making coffee. You can come in." He stepped inside, noticing how the house had changed. The paint fresher, the air lighter. On a shelf near the window sat the toy phone, polished and still. Emma caught his gaze and said softly, "I kept it. I don't want to forget what it means." Ray nodded. "A reminder?" She smiled faintly. "That sometimes people do the wrong thing for the right reason." They sat together for a while. No police talk, no investigation. Just two people who had both spent their lives chasing ghosts. When he finally stood to leave, she stopped him. "Detective," she said, "you spent all those years looking for me. Thank you for not giving up." Ray looked at her, at the woman she'd become, at the life that had survived against all odds, and said quietly, "It was never just about finding you. It was about finding the truth." Outside, the evening sun dipped behind the trees, and the sound of distant laughter drifted from somewhere down the street. For the first time since 1987, Maple Hollow felt alive again. Ray walked back to his car, opened the door, and glanced once more at the house. Through the window, he could see Emma and Janet together. Two silhouettes framed by warm light, living proof that even the deepest mysteries sometimes end, not with answers, but with healing. He smiled, started the engine, and drove away. The toy phone on the windowsill stayed still, silent, and for the first time in 18 years, it didn't need to ring again.